Back in 2025, I was so excited for the Dark Ages that I pre-ordered the premium edition for 100 smackaroons. When I finally got to play it, I couldn't help but feel like there was something missing, some critical component that would make the whole thing come together the way that Doom Eternal did. It needed something. I thought if I came back to it later after my initial disappointment that I'd be able to appreciate it. Unfortunately, something still felt like it was missing. For me, the Dark Ages ended up being a massive letdown. I put in hundreds of hours into Doom Eternal, only to put in about 40 hours into the Dark Ages before putting it down for good. Or, so I thought. I knew that I'd be getting a DLC from the premium edition eventually, but after trying and failing to get into the base game, I just grew to not really care that much. That is until I saw the Revelations reveal trailer. I was immediately relieved to see the return of Doom Eternal's movement, but part of me was still skeptical. Would it just feel like Doom Eternal mechanics slapped onto the Dark Ages? How could they possibly make something that both lived up to Doom Eternal while also addressing the failings of the base game? Could Revelations be the thing to save Doom from the Dark Ages? Let's get the obvious part out of the way. The shield is simply not an exciting enough of a tool to base an entire FPS campaign around. The most damning thing that I can say is that it didn't make me feel like I was weaving through a projectile maze the way that was supposed to be the main selling point of the game. I'm not making actual decisions about where to go when there is an obvious green light for me to parry. In the vast majority of cases, there is no reason not to parry the green light. There is no positioning or thought involved because I'm just reacting to the green light. In the original Doom, positioning is the primary vehicle for its skill expression. The projectile maze creates actual decision-making. You can even position yourself in such a way to have enemy projectiles hit one another to get them to infight. There is actual skill expression in the way the original handles its projectiles that the Dark Ages doesn't even come close to. The Dark Ages failed at its own concept. The mechanics of the shield are far too binary. Enemies like the Cyber Demon and the Agadon Hunter are not exciting to fight because they rely so heavily on you baiting out their green attacks just so that you can parry them. There aren't enough active abilities tied to the shield to make me excited to actually use the thing. The shield saw is great, but its use case is very limited. You can't use it at all on super heavies or bosses, which creates this constant feeling of disconnect and disappointment. You can empower the shield by throwing it into fodder demons so that it supposedly does more damage, but the empowered attacks don't feel distinct enough from the non-empowered attacks to make me actually feel that difference. Shield launching is fun at first, but just like parrying, by the end of the game it just gets old. There isn't enough potential for skill expression in any of the shield's functions. The green light projectiles also look ridiculous. It felt like there was an effort to make the Dark Ages less overtly gamey compared to Doom Eternal, but these goofy looking projectiles fly in the face of that. The aesthetics of the Dark Ages levels are generally more grounded, with muted color palettes, and then you have these goofy looking green orbs ruining all of that effort that went into making the game more of an immersive experience compared to Doom Eternal. Putting all of the eggs into the shield basket not only made the game's combat significantly less interesting, it made the game's world setting impossible to take seriously because of how inherently goofy the game's combat looks. The fact that the shield can also block in all directions is absurd. It makes it seem like id just made up the rules as they went along. It feels like patchwork game design, similar to how the gasoline system in Doom Eternal worked. Well, the player might run out of ammo, so better make up some rule about Doom Guy being able to generate gasoline out of his ass. Well, our game has too much unavoidable damage with the shield as is, so let's just make it so that it can block in all directions, even though that makes zero sense. Think about how ridiculous this is. The shield, the tool that the entire game is based around, does not function in the basic way that you would assume a shield would function. It blocks things that come into contact with it. They couldn't even get that right. The entire foundation of the game feels sloppy as a result. Another root cause for the game's issues was the massive level count. The base game contains 22 levels, and they aren't small. Both Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal had 13 levels each. This is a huge increase, and the game suffers heavily for it. Barring Exaltia and Terrace Nabad, each level in Doom Eternal had a very distinct identity that made it almost impossible to mistake one for the other. I can barely tell the levels apart in the Dark Ages first half. There is a constant feeling of forward momentum in Doom Eternal on a macro and micro scale that just isn't present in the Dark Ages for a long portion of its game time. Levels in general are far larger than they were in Eternal. On paper, this is fine, but in practice, it's terrible. Yes, everything is bigger, but it's also more shallow. You have the bigger maps, but now you have no interesting traversal options, making exploration boring and backtracking genuinely unbearable. Being able to destroy certain points on a map that are basically completely divorced from one another adds nothing. Just because there is technically non-linearity doesn't mean that it's engaging non-linearity. On a surface level, the more open-ended level exploration is a return to form to the classic formula of Doom. The problem is that Doom is not Doom. In classic Doom, weapon acquisition is on a per-level basis. The core player base is generally going to be pistol starting most maps, so weapons must be found on every new level. This makes exploration an essential part of the combat loop, whereas in New Doom, it's entirely optional. Ammo in classic Doom was genuinely limited. It was possible to completely run out and be forced to resort to using your fists. Even if you're a casual player that doesn't pistol start every map, ammo and health management was directly tied to exploration. In classic Doom, exploration was how you managed your resources. In New Doom, combat is how you manage your resources. This means non-linear level progression is basically pointless, whereas in classic Doom, it was the point. In many cases, especially in action games, linearity would be the far better option. With linearity, you are able to consistently raise the stakes as the level goes on. This creates a nice flow, where the start of the level begins at a small level of tension, and then things escalate from there until a grand finale. Dark Ages is, at its best, when it's a mostly linear straight line, with combat arenas that escalate in complexity as the level goes on. Moving through these open-ended levels in the Dark Ages made me feel like I was playing a long-forgotten multiplayer game with bots enabled. It just feels like there is an essential element missing here that would make these levels feel as grand as they're trying to portray them as.
He just took out a siege tower. Get word to Novik.
I think they wanted to make you feel like you were part of a conflict, but it just doesn't work because Doom Guy feels so divorced from what the Sentinels are doing that I just can't get into the idea that I'm part of this large-scale war. The way that the player can interact with the Sentinels is also wildly inconsistent and adds to the feeling that the Slayer and the Sentinels are not occupying the same game world. Sometimes you can shoot them and they bleed. Sometimes you can shoot them and nothing happens. Sometimes the Slayer puts his gun down, so you don't even have the option to shoot them. I don't feel like I'm a part of their conflict because they don't react to anything. Some might argue that being able to kill them would break immersion, but I would counter with Half-Life 1.
Warning. Detonation detected in materials laboratory.
In Half-Life, you are able to kill just about every scientist you come across. It might not be in character for Gordon Freeman, but the game actually respecting your decision to shoot at an unarmed civilian might be enough for the player to actually take the scientist's presence seriously. They don't just feel like window dressing the way that the Dark Ages NPCs do. They are an active part of the game's world.
Hey, Gordon. get the hell out of here. Took a little damage, but I can make it.
Half-Life 1 is pretty much the benchmark for an immersive styled FPS game, so being able to kill NPCs even when it's out of character does not take away from immersion, it adds to it. From a story perspective, there is an uncomfortable truth that we must address in order for the franchise to truly move forward. The Doom universe was a failure. The Night Sentinels are not interesting, and they never will be. I wouldn't be able to tell you a single character trait about any of them other than, oh, he's the leader, or oh, he's the betrayer, even if you held a gun to my head. Doom Guy getting superpowers by going into the Divinity Machine is not interesting. The problem with the Divinity Machine can be ascertained by looking at what Hugo Martin himself said about power fantasies.
You know, because the power fantasy that is earned is far more satisfying than the one that is just handed to you, you know.
I would argue this applies to the story as well. When Doom Guy enters the Divinity Machine, the power fantasy doesn't feel earned, it feels like it was given. It makes Doom Guy's strength seem more like an anime power-up. This is what leads to sections like this almost becoming cringeworthy. The thing that made Doom Guy cool is how he loved killing demons so much, to the point that he became so skilled at it that they began to fear him as some harbinger of doom. Now that it's revealed that he's basically a clone of God, and he was given superpowers by some alien machine, that original Doom fantasy was shattered.
It is you in their world.
The obsession with alien mythology ruined the other characters that actually worked.
You think the only way is to kill them all, leave nothing behind. And you may be right. But we can't just shut it all down. Without Argent energy, it will be worse. I don't expect you to agree. But with this, we can continue our work. I am not the villain in this story. I do what I do because there is no choice.
Rerouting tether coordinates complete.
Our time is up. I can't kill you, but I won't have you standing in our way. Until we see each other again.
Dr. Hayden is the Seraphim. He's been with us the entire time.
Samuel Hayden turning into some alien is not interesting. It's a waste of the best character in the entire trilogy. Treating him as an exposition dumper in Eternal was bad enough, but changing him from the arrogant utilitarian robot leader with a massive god complex that's willing to make any sacrifice to save humanity into yet just another alien that I don't care about was insanely disappointing. Doom Guy being a clone of Devoth, who is basically God and the devil, is absolutely stupid.
He is the first being and my creator. When he fell, I ascended.
And goes against everything that made Doom Guy interesting as a player character. Doom Guy is supposed to be a guy. The simplicity is what made him cool. The other major issue with Eternal's DLCs and the Dark Ages is how the story is conveyed. Do I even have to explain how asinine making me read the story in a Doom game is? This isn't 1993 anymore. At the very least, the codex pages are optional, but using text on a screen as your game's intro multiple times in a row, all you have to do to understand why people prefer 2016 storytelling so much is to watch the first 60 seconds of Doom 2016 and then watch the first 60 seconds of the Dark Ages. Cutscenes in a Doom game should be handled with care.
You need to remove each lens individually. Carefully release the hinges.
I'm not here for a story, and you know this, so when you throw a cutscene in my face, you better make sure it's worth my time. Cutscenes in a Doom game should be fast, visceral, and most importantly make me want to kill as many demons as possible. If you introduce other characters, the focus should be on how they play off of Doom Guy's path of aggression. Samuel Hayden in Doom 2016 demonstrated how to do this perfectly.
We spent decades perfecting the science, selling it to humanity. We balanced their hell energy with our science, making it usable and safe. We solved an energy crisis the world had no answer for. It works. You cannot do this. You must stop. The hell energy is unusable without the filters.
Warning. Energy contamination detected.
The focus should be on one or two other characters that Doom Guy plays off of, not on an ensemble cast of literally who's that you have to read about in order to discern any personality from. Dark Ages is at its worst when it is constantly shoving how much bigger the game is than Eternal in your face. You have these large-scale maps, turret sections, and vehicle sections, and all of these aspects fall flat on their face. It is with complete conviction that I say that the game would be better if every turret and vehicle section had been cut from the game entirely. They don't just not add value, they actively took value away from the game with their inclusion. I based my decision to not run Ultra Nightmare entirely on the reason that I had no interest in ever playing these sections again. The Dragon could have worked if they focused on dogfighting and making you feel fast. I was hoping it would play like a rail shooter akin to Star Fox. Instead, the focus is on pressing space when the green thing shows up and then left-clicking afterwards. The mech could have worked if they focused on giving you a genuine arsenal that you could swap between, kind of like a consolidated version of the Slayer's weapon set. Instead, the focus is on pressing space when the green thing shows up and left-clicking afterwards. I wish I was exaggerating, but even on Nightmare on maxed out sliders, that is genuinely all there is to these sections. Press the button when a green thing shows up, left-click, and then occasionally right-click when a meter fills up. There are no other decisions to make. It doesn't even look that cool experientially. I don't feel the speed of the Dragon, and I don't feel the immense weight of the mech. Having sections that are focused on experiential elements in a game that does not care at all about its immersive qualities is generally a bad idea. These sections are what I would consider abject failures. They take what was already a flawed, uneven game and made it significantly worse. While the gimmicks are the most egregious offenders, this obsession with simplicity also neuters the game's core mechanics. Some people disliked the pressure put on the player to swap between weapons in Doom Eternal. I don't agree with that sentiment, but I was open to a sequel that changed things up and did away with the instantaneous weapon swapping. Classic Doom had a very slow weapon swap as well. The problem in the Dark Ages base game is that it's balanced in such a way that I barely ever felt pressured to swap weapons at all. It felt like a massive overcorrection. Ideally, I should feel pressured to switch weapons on a situational basis, like in classic Doom, but in the base game of the Dark Ages, you can pretty much rely on weapons like the super shotgun or the chain shot for the entire thing. The individual weapons were simply made too powerful. Add to this that weapon swapping is so much slower, and it becomes very easy to just go the path of least resistance for the entire game. Yes, there is technically more freedom of approach in the Dark Ages, but the lack of friction and pushback makes that freedom pointless. Now, with all that being said, it came as a wonderful surprise when I played Revelations, and practically every major issue I listed out here was addressed, and then some. I say this also with complete conviction. Revelations is a miracle. It is without a doubt one of the best DLCs that I have ever played. It turned the Dark Ages from a disappointment into something I'd consider one of my favorites of all time. The turret and vehicle sections are now gone completely. Instead of these wide open levels with multiple objectives tossed around a mostly empty wasteland, you get these beautifully paced levels with thoughtfully designed combat arenas that escalate in tension as the level goes on. What shocked me the most about Revelations is not only how it addressed the major issues with the base game, it also addressed major issues with their core design that they've had for a long time now. Boss fights are consistently much better than in any of their previous games. The hub world of Revelations is also a massive improvement over the hub of Doom Eternal. There are hidden combat encounters and puzzles throughout Purgatory, making it feel like a place with a lot of meaningful interactivity. It's very satisfying finding every nook and cranny of that map and watching it expand as the game goes on. The hub in Doom Eternal tries to do something similar, but it's so small in scope that it just doesn't add as much to the experience as I had hoped. I was hoping for more hidden areas and optional combat encounters in the Doom Eternal hub. When the Khan Maker takes over the ship and demons start pouring in, I got massively excited, but then that combat section ends in about 30 seconds.
This stronghold will now serve as your prison. With no power, you can do no more harm to our mission, and we may continue the work that must be done.
The hub in Eternal is basically just a way for the player to choose what upgrades they want. In Revelations, the hub genuinely felt like an essential part of the game. It has enough going on that in some ways it feels like its own level, which I think is the best case scenario for a hub world in any game. Puzzles are also so much better implemented in Revelations, and in general, the way the player interacts with the world has so much more thought put into it. Gone are the goofy, out-of-place Mario platforms and monkey bars of Doom Eternal. Everything in the environment feels like it's genuinely a part of the game's world instead. It's so much easier to take the world building and setting seriously because of this. The story in Revelations feels a lot more personal and worked so much better for me than the story of Eternal or the Dark Ages base game. The base game did have a few story beats that I did think were decent, but the story in Revelations is what I would consider the ideal Doom story framework. The story starts with Doom Guy at his lowest point. When Doom Guy blasts this demon with a shotgun and the demon just laughs in his face, it made the situation feel genuinely hopeless.
I will be your guide. I am servant to the council.
It made it seem like Doom Guy was finally out of his league. This makes the finale all the more satisfying. In order for the power fantasy of being the Doomslayer to feel earned, you have to be willing to make him vulnerable. The story focus in a Doom game works best when the focus is on Doom Guy as a guy. I don't want some grand tale of some space king getting into it with some sort of space hussy over space juice. All I want to see is Doom Guy escaping a hole in hell. I understand that they cannot scrap the entire Doom universe. However, I'd like them to focus on trimming the fat and focusing on the aspects that did work.
With this, we can continue our work.
The High Council of Hell seems like they could have a lot of potential as villains moving forward. If there was some way to bring back Samuel Hayden, as he was in Doom 2016, I would go for that as well. I want to see less characters, but I want to see more personality. I want them to get rid of codex entries entirely. If I have to read about something for it to make sense in a Doom game, it needs to be scrapped. It's okay to leave things as a mystery. Just make the cutscenes engaging and leave the rest to the player's imaginations. The best part of the Dark Ages storyline is when Doomguy has to escape the underworld. This is a case where I would rather the developer do less work rather than more. I don't want all of these other characters or a Doom universe. I want to see Doomguy trapped, and then I want to see him escape, and then I want to see him kill his captors. For the most part, that's exactly what Revelations is. In many ways, I would consider it the ideal Doom game, even more so than Doom Eternal. The better presentation also extends to the combat arenas themselves. Gone are the stupid-looking boxes that Mancubi and Arachnotrons stood on to snipe at you. These boxes made each combat arena stand out far less. In Revelations, every combat arena feels distinct and of the world that it's taking place in. Revelations is great because it trimmed the fat of the Doom universe setting. I'm no longer constantly distracted by lackluster immersive elements like the Sentinels overtly being window dressing and the constant yammering in my ear.
Get a team ready to sweep the forest when we're done. My people guarded this forest for generations. You'll need a key to continue through that gate. That's it. The gate will open now.
It's simply a story about Doomguy in hell. That's what I play Doom for. DLC can be a great thing. Every good thing about DLC as a concept is exactly what the Dark Ages needed to excel. DLC is naturally scaled down, which is exactly what the Dark Ages needed. 22 levels was simply too much, and the game felt bloated as a result. Revelations in comparison feels tight, refined, and nearly every second of gameplay felt essential to the experience. There are only 5 levels, 2 of which serve as the intro and outro levels and are around half the size as the main 3. You might think it would be impossible, no matter how good the DLC is, for it to measure up to a game that features 22 levels. In reality, it's the base game that doesn't come close to measuring up to this DLC. These 3 levels are some of the best in the entire franchise. The desert level, Osius, might be my favorite level that modern id has ever made. There is something about it that feels so unique to this game. On the surface, it's just a desert level, but there's something about this massive city structure and the looming Goliath rib cages embedded into the sand that gives it a lot of character without resorting to the Saturday morning cartoon vibes of the Doom Eternal levels. It has a sense of grit and reality to it that I don't think we've seen since Doom 2016. I highly enjoyed all 5 of these levels. So much so that I'm currently on my 4th playthrough of the DLC using maxed out difficulty sliders. It's frustrating, but the game is so fun that I can't stop wanting to play it at higher and higher levels. This is the exact opposite reaction I had to getting to the end of the Dark Ages base game. The other aspect of DLC that saved the Dark Ages here is the mutual trust there is between a player base willing to pay for a game's DLC and the developers. Developers know that people that bought the DLC are people that really like Doom, generally speaking. This means they can cater the DLC entirely to people that already know the game's rule set and enjoy it enough to not only replay the game, but to also pay for more content of a game they already played. This allows the developer to push the DLC player base to their limits in a way that just wouldn't be possible in a fully priced new game meant to sell millions of copies to the unwashed masses. Because the DLC pushes back so much more than the base game did, I actually felt pressured to assess every option in my arsenal. Weapons that I never bothered with, like the Accelerator or the Ravager in the base game, are now ones that I swap between constantly. It still feels distinct from Doom Eternal, as weapon swapping is still much slower, but it feels so much more engaging when I genuinely feel the need to change my weapons for different situations. Every reason why DLC expansions work at a fundamental level are exactly what the Dark Ages needed to become great. The spear is not only great on its own, its inclusion saved the shield. Alone, the shield's utility would often feel too binary for it to feel like it had any potential for meaningful skill expression. The shield launch feels alright, but launching myself into a straight line constantly just isn't that interesting. The meat hook worked because I can choose any direction that I want. I also believe there should have been some method of traversal without requiring an enemy to lock onto. A simple forward dash with the shield would have added a lot and been mechanically distinct from the multi-directional dash of Eternal. The shield saw part of the shield is great, but not being able to use it at all on boss enemies in super heavies is very disappointing. With the spear, I can latch onto any enemy or boss and fly around to my heart's content. Compared to the spear, the shield's utility is just so much more limited. There should be some way to empower the blocking aspect of the shield to make it so I can safely block multiple attacks. As a defensive tool, it leaves much to be desired. In fact, I generally feel safer when using the spear because of how easily the shield breaks on Nightmare. Once it's broken, you are defenseless. If I mess up my initial dash, I do take that damage, but I can safely dash again to get away. If I mess up my block, I don't take that damage, but the likelihood of me dying has now increased tenfold the second my shield goes down. For a few seconds, I'm left with no options. This isn't even a possibility with the spear. With the ability to now swap between the two options, it is far easier to appreciate the shield for what it is. It no longer feels like it's just a matter of having to wait for the green light to appear in order to parry. Now you have multiple ways of dealing with green attacks. With the shield, you can obviously block it, but now with the spear, you can either dash away or use the much more difficult to time slice action. We've gone from one way to interact with the green light to three, just like that. There are use cases for all three of these options, and I swap back and forth between them constantly. Because you now have the spear, you are also no longer defenseless when throwing the shield saw into an enemy to lock them into place. You also aren't defenseless anymore when the shield breaks because you can swap to the spear. The spear makes the shield better simply by existing. They play off of each other in ways that aren't clear at first, but once you learn how to weave these tools together, it feels like this is how the game should have been to begin with. As far as traversal mechanics go, the spear goes a long way in making level exploration more interesting. The addition of dashing adds a much needed traversal function to break up the monotony of level backtracking. Meat hook platforming is also far better than the shield platforming, and this is demonstrated whenever Revelations throws in a shield grappling point. Meat hook platforming at least allows for some form of player expression, whereas shield platforming is just pressing the shield button onto a prompt to go flying forwards. People complain about the platforming in Doom Eternal, but at least that game allowed you to skip over entire sections when you understood how the platforming mechanics worked. There was still some kind of player expression in Eternal's platforming, whereas in the Dark Ages base game, it's generally just a matter of pressing a prompt and watching Doomguy fly forwards. We went from some player expression allowed to absolutely none. Thankfully, Revelations is a massive improvement in this regard. All in all, Revelations is one of the best DLCs released in a very long time. I only wish it could be bought as a standalone because I would generally recommend you buy that instead of the base game. It really is that much better. It also isn't just a matter of the Dark Ages being bad and Revelations being better than bad. The flaws of Revelations are less flaws of the DLC and more so flaws of modern id itself. In some ways, Revelations actually alleviates some of the story issues that were in Doom Eternal. I never much cared for the Khan Maker as a villain, and I genuinely did not care at all about the Betrayer. But Revelations genuinely made me care. I understand where the hatred of the Khan Maker comes from now, and I understand why the Betrayer is such a big deal. The lesson here is that I don't want to have to read about a character to know why they are important. I want to see it for myself. Revelations not only saved Doom from the Dark Ages, but from Eternal's mess of a narrative. Revelations is genuinely incredible content in its own right that I would consider one of the best FPS campaigns I have ever played. It has a good amount of content for the price, it's highly replayable, and most importantly, it's just really good.